Welcome to the course. My name is John Elder. I'm the founder of Codemy.com, and in this free and complete course, I'll walk you step by step through the Dart programming language. We'll start at the absolute beginner level and then quickly move through intermediate right up to but not quite including advanced topics. Why Dart? Because Dart's the programming language used in Flutter, and Flutter is the amazing framework that lets you build cross-platform GUI apps quickly and easily. So you need a solid understanding of Dart in order to really use Flutter, and that solid understanding of Dart is what you'll learn here today. This course is made up of 14 sections, including Dart installation, variables, data types, lists, maps, loops, logic, functions, user input, string to integer conversion, user input type conversion, FizzBuzz, classes and object-oriented programming, and classes without initialization. After this course, you'll understand the Dart programming language well enough to dive headfirst into Flutter so you can start building awesome GUI apps. If you enjoy this course, check out my website, Codemy.com, where I have 50 other courses on web development, GUI app creation, database development, and more. Use coupon code YouTube50 to get 50% off memberships on my courses, videos, and books for a one-time fee, which is insanely cheap. So, let's learn Dart.
So in this video, we're going to install Dart. We're going to install all the packages and things that we need to start to use Dart, get it up and running, and then move on from there. So I'm in my Git Bash terminal, and I'm going to create a couple of directories. First, I'm going to mkdir, make directory. I want to put this in the C drive, and I'm just going to call this Dart. This is where we're going to download and install Dart, the actual programming language, and all the stuff that we're going to need. Okay, while I'm here, I'm going to make another directory, put it in the C drive. And let's just call this Dart stuff. This is where we're going to save our Dart files, our programs as we create them, as we learn Dart. All right, that's good. Let's head over to our web browser. And I'm just going to go to Google and type in Dart install or something like that. And then here's the website we need. And this is dart.dev/get-dart. If this changes by the time you watch this video, just Google it and you'll find it. And what we need is the Dart SDK. Now I'm on a Windows computer, so we'll be doing this for Windows. There's a bunch of different ways you can do this. But you can see there's some command prompts you can use if you have Chocolatey installed. We don't. You can see Linux and Mac commands that you can do it from the terminal. We don't have those either. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and I'm going to grab any release channel by downloading the SDK as a zip file. So I'll click that. Now I'm at the get-dart/archive page. And you can come through here and it's a little confusing, right? There's a bunch of different options. We just want the stable channel. There's other channels you can get, the dev channel, the beta channel. Those aren't as stable. We want the most stable current version, and that's just the stable channel right here. So we come through here, and I'm on a 64-bit machine, so I want this Dart SDK. So you can see, you can hover on both of these. I just want this one here, the first one, Dart SDK. So I'm gonna click this, and we're gonna save this. You could save this anywhere, but we've got that directory we created. So I'm gonna navigate to that. That was C/Dart. There it is. I'm just going to save it there. And this is a pretty decent sized file. It's 186 megabytes, it looks like. And so this is Firefox. And so my downloads are up here. If you're on Chrome, they're probably down there in the corner. Wherever they are in your browser, click this thing to open it. And here we go. Now this is a zip file, so it's all zipped up. We need to unzip it. We need to extract it. So I'm going to click extract all. And it's going to ask me where I want to put this. Now this is fine. I'll just extract it here. Now this is like 400 and something megabytes. It's a big package to install. So make sure you have a lot of space in your computer. Eventually we're going to learn Flutter and you're going to need, I don't know, like 10 gigabytes for that or something. So you're going to need a lot of space on your computer. So this should just take a second. Okay, there we go. And here I'm going to navigate back to Dart. And you can see here's the zip file. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. And if we click this, and then we see this Dart-SDK. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this. So right click cut. And I'm just going to come back and I'm going to paste this in the main Dart directory. You don't really have to do that, but I like to keep these things nice and clean. So you can see now this one here is empty. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. Okay, so I'm in my C Dart and we have this Dart-SDK. Now we need to add this to our environmental paths on Windows so that our terminal will know where to find it when we want to run Dart programs, right? So the way we do that is we click on the double click this and we want to go to bin, right? And so here we can come up here and right click. And then what we want to do is copy the address as text. We just need to copy the address on our computer where this is sitting. And we know it's sitting at C/Dart/Dart-SDK/bin. But instead of typing all that out, we could just right click on here and click copy address as text. Next, you want to go and hit your Windows Start menu. This is actually on the other monitor, so you can't see it, but the Windows Start menu pops up. You can imagine that. Just type in ENV, short for environmental, and a little icon will pop up that says Edit the System Environmental Variables, and that's on your control panel. So just click that icon, and this thing pops up. And this is where our environmental variables are. We can see right here. So we click on that, and then look through this list, and hopefully you'll have a path. If not, you'll need to click New and add path, but you should already have path on here. And what we need to do is add Dart to our path. So I'm going to click this and click Edit. And when I do, this box pops up with all the other variables, environmental variables that we have. I'm just going to navigate over here and click New. You can see this little thing pops up here. I'm going to right click and click Paste, and it pastes in that address we just copied from the Windows Explorer, which is c/dart/dart-sdk/bin. So go ahead and click OK. And now you're good to go. Now, if we click Edit again, you can see, hey, it's still there. Make sure it is. It is. Okay, so we're good. So we can click OK here, get out of this, and we can close this. We're done with all of this. So we're now installed. Now, I like to use Sublime Text. A lot of you guys like to use things like Visual Code and stuff like that. You could probably get away with that for Dart, but I'm just going to use Sublime. So we're going to need to install the Dart package for Sublime just so the code looks nice. And I'll show you why in just a second. But first, if we head over to our terminal, what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this terminal because you probably need to restart this since we've added an environmental variable to the path. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'm going to open another one, and I'm just going to type in Dart and hit enter. And if something pops up and it says a command line utility for Dart development, we know, hey, Dart has been installed correctly. If you get some sort of error, Dart probably hasn't been installed correctly. You didn't unzip it correctly, or you didn't add the right variable path to our environmental variables or something. So just rewatch what we just did and give it another try, but you should probably have this. That looks great. So I'm going to now navigate into our C Dart stuff directory because that's where we're going to start creating things. And let's head over to Sublime Text. And I just opened a new file, and I'm going to go File, Save As, and I'm going to navigate to our Dart stuff directory. And I'm just going to call this hello.dart. Now, Dart files end in .dart, like Python files end in .py, Go files end in .go, Ruby files end in .rb, Dart files end in .dart. So let's just create a very simple Dart program just to see if this is working, because it's probably not yet. So let's go void main, and we'll get into what all this is in a bit. But here, I'm just going to go print, and then we'll do our hello world file, because that's always the first file. And Dart programming, we have to put the semicolon at the end. That's going to drive you crazy. Now, if we save this, you'll notice this is all white. And that's not what we want. We want this to be different colored based on the code, like all other files do when we write code. And the problem is Sublime doesn't know what Dart is. So we need to install the Dart package in order for it to know what this is. If we go to View and Syntax, we could see, there's no Dart listed here. So we could do that. Let's head over to Preferences and hit Package Control, and then just type in Install. And you can see this Install Package thing pops up. So click that, and this little box pops up. Now we could just type in Dart. And there's a couple of options, Dart and Dart Lite. I don't think it probably matters all that much. So I'm just going to go ahead and click the regular Dart one. I click that, this thing pops up. There's some more instructions here. We don't really need to do this because we're not going to be running a terminal in Sublime, because that's always a terrible idea. So we could just close this. And now if we come back over here and click View, Syntax, we can see, hey, there's Dart. And when we hit it, boom, it changes color, as you would expect all coding things to change color. So you may have to restart Sublime in order to do this. I didn't have to this time, it looks like, so we should be good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and save this file, head back over to our terminal, and let's ls to make sure, yep, there it is. There's that file, hello Dart. So to run Dart files, we just type in Dart and then the name of the file, hello.dart. And boom, it prints out hello world, just like we would expect it to, because hey, even though we don't know Dart yet, we know that, hey, that probably is going to print out hello world to the screen. And sure enough, it did, and we're good to go. So that's how to install Dart on a Windows machine. Very easy, especially if you're using Sublime. If you're using Visual Studio Code, you're going to have to install some packages and do the whole thing. And Sublime is so easy. That's what we're going to be using just to learn the Dart programming language. Later on, when we start looking at Flutter, we might use something else like Visual Studio Code or something. But for now, we can get away with Sublime, and so that's what we're going to do. So that's all there is to it. I think Dart is going to be a lot of fun for you guys to learn. And again, Dart is the programming language that Flutter uses. And if you're familiar with Flutter, Flutter is that great framework that you can use to make mobile apps very easily. They work on Android, they work on iOS, they work on everything right out of the box. That's the great thing about Flutter. But first, we need to learn the Dart programming language. So we're going to spend a little bit of time learning Dart. It's quick and easy. It shouldn't take very long at all. And it's a lot of fun. In this video, we're going to look at variables in Dart. And variables in Dart are very easy, but there's a few things you need to know, and that's what we're going to look at in this video. So Dart is more like a C-type programming language. So a lot of the C-type conventions hold true in Dart, just like in Go we've been looking at recently. So you're going to usually use camel case to name your variables. There's a couple of things. They can't start with numbers. They can't use special characters except for the underscore and the $sign. And that's pretty much it. You can't use keywords, right? Same as all programming languages. So to use a variable in Dart, you have to first declare it. And there are many different ways you can declare variables in Dart. So let's just kind of start out with strings here. So one way to do it is to use the var keyword, and that's short for variable, right? So var, and then just name your variable, and then set it equal to whatever. You can also be very specific. Instead of using the var keyword, you could declare what kind of data type this is going to be. So if we know this is going to be a string, we could also go string name John. That works as well. If we know it's going to be an integer, same thing holds true. We could var x and set that equal to 41, or we could be explicit and say int x equals 41. All right, so if we wanted to comment this out and give this a try, we could just come down here and print x. Remember, all of our statements have to end in semicolons in Dart. And let's also comment this guy out. Now, if we head over to our terminal, I'm in my C Dart stuff directory. If we were on Dart vars.dart, we get 41. Likewise, we can uncomment this guy out and comment this guy out. Run this guy again. We're going to get the same thing. Just 41, right? There's also something called a dynamic, right? So if you're not sure what the data type is and you don't want to use the var keyword, you can use the dynamic keyword. And same deal, we could say, I don't know, first name, set that equal to Tim. Whatever. So generally, I just stick with var, but dynamic is a thing, and well, there you go. Finally, we have something called constants and finals. Now, constants are keywords that you're never going to change, right? You set them once, and they can't be changed. They just are what they are. And final is the same thing. It's just slightly different. So if we go const and final, we could set one up for const like this with the const keyword. And then, same deal, same things. We could use string or not. And we could say, full name equals John Elder. Likewise, we could use the final keyword. And again, we could call a string and, nickname equals J, right? Whatever. So what's the difference between a const and a final? Well, it's a little complicated. Consts are, if you know what it's going to be at compile time, use a const. If you know what it's going to be at runtime, use a final. So think of a date or something. When the program runs, the date is going to be different every time you run it. Well, in that case, use a final because the date's going to change. If the date is never going to change and you just want the date that's going to be when you compile the program, use the const. That's a sort of not a complete answer, but it's good enough for now. The difference between const and final, and that's all there is to it. So variables, again, very simple. You're usually just going to use the var keyword. Again, you don't have to use the data type in here. Dart will imply it, but it's always best practices to use the data type if you know it. If you're not sure what it's going to be, you can use a dynamic. Finally, one last thing, declaring and not using. So we can go var my name and then just not assign anything to it. And down here, if we wanted to print out my name, but we can come down here and run this guy again, and we'll see it's going to return null. So, the variable doesn't have anything assigned to it. It's just null. It's not anything, right? So that's kind of handy for a lot of different things. You can assign something to it later on if you wanted to. We could come down here afterwards and say, my name equals John. Come up here, copy this guy, print it in a second time. The first time it'll be null. The second time it'll be John because we changed it. And we see that here, null and John. So those are variables in Dart. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And that's all there is to it. In this video, we're going to look at data types in Dart. And data types are pretty simple in Dart. There's not a whole lot of them, and they're pretty straightforward, and we're going to go through them in this video. So basically, we're looking at numbers, strings, booleans, lists, maps, and dynamics. Now, numbers, we have integers and doubles, and we'll talk about those in a second. Strings, pretty straightforward, text, Booleans is always true and false. And then we have lists and maps, and lists are arrays. In Python, they're called lists. In every other programming language, they're called arrays. They're called lists in Dart. And maps are basically dictionaries in Python or hashes in Ruby. They're key value pairs. So we'll probably talk about lists and maps in another video because they're a little bit more complicated. Finally, we have dynamic. If we haven't explicitly stated what the data type is, Dart will imply that it's dynamic, meaning, sort of like a catch-all, right? So let's go through here. There's not a whole lot to know about these things, but there's a few things. So we'll go ahead and look at them one at a time in this video. So I'm using the Sublime Text Editor and the Git Bash terminal as always. And as always, you can find a link to the code in the pinned comment section below, as well as a list of the playlist with all the other Dart videos in this series. So check that out if you haven't so far. So we've got our basic starter code that we've always got here. I'm just calling this file dt.dart, short for data types, I guess. And so let's just start out with a string. So we start out by calling the string keyword, and then we give this variable a name. I'm gonna call it first name. And we set it equal to, whatever. We've already looked at this before. So pretty simple there. So I can just print, and then let's go string just to keep track of these. And then we can call first name inside of this quotation marks using the $sign symbol like that. So if we save this, head over to our terminal. I'm in my C Dart stuff directory, and we can run dart dt.dart, and then it pastes out string John, right? Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So now let's talk about numbers. Numbers, you have two options. You have integers, which are whole numbers, 5, 27, 108. And you have doubles, which are decimals, 1995, right? And so to use integers, we use the int keyword. And I'm just going to call this my num. We can set it equal to anything we want. I'm just going to grab this guy, paste it in again. Here, let's go integer and change this to my num. So, obviously, if we save this and run it, we know what we're going to get. Integer 41, right? Pretty straightforward. Doubles are, like I said, decimal point. We use the double keyword. And then, other num. And we can set this equal to 1995 or something, right? A decimal number. So again, we can print double and then go other num. Let's change this to num. There we go. Save this, run it. Pretty simple. Double 1995, right? That's your double. Next, we have booleans. And to use a boolean, we call the bool keyword, right? B-O-O-L, short for booleans. And then, let's just call this my bool. And we can set this equal to anything we want. So notice this is lowercase. We can also do true, also lowercase. I'm going to switch it back to false because, false is more fun. And we can print out boolean and then my bool. And if we save this and run it, of course, it's going to print out false, right? Pretty simple. Finally, we have dynamic. And like I said, dynamic is a little weird. It's if you haven't decided what the thing is, then you can use dynamic. There are situations where you might want to use this. I don't find it all that useful, but, there are times when you might need to use it. You just use the dynamic keyword. And then, let's call this full name, something like that. Set it equal to John Elder. And again, we can print this guy to the screen, dynamic, and then full name. So of course, if we run this, we're going to get John Elder. So those are your main data types that you're going to be working with. Like I said, we're going to talk about lists and maps in their own separate videos because they're a lot more complicated than these basic data types. And, it's very straightforward. You have strings, you have integers, you have doubles, booleans, and dynamic. Like I said, you're probably not going to use dynamic all that often, but you'll definitely use booleans. You'll definitely use doubles and strings all day, every day if you're using Dart. And it's just that simple to use them. In this video, we're going to look at lists in Dart. And there are a couple of different types of lists in Dart. There's fixed length and there's growable. We're not going to talk about fixed length in this video or probably any video because I think that's stupid. We're going to look at growable lists, meaning you can add things and remove things and grow them and shrink them as you want. And of course, a list in Dart is just an array. That's what Dart calls them, sort of like Python. And they're just a list of items. So let's head over to our code. I'm using the Sublime Text Editor and the Git Bash terminal as always. And as always, you can find a link to the code in the pinned comment section below, as well as a link to the playlist with all the other videos in this Dart series. So check that out if you haven't so far. So I've got a file called list.dart. It's just our basic Dart starter code that we've always got. And I've got a few things here that we're going to kind of fill out as we go along. So like I said, we're just going to look at growable lists that can be changed and added to and things like that in this video. So let's create a list. We call var and then just name it. I'm going to call this my list. And then we just set this equal to whatever we want. So we can say 1, 2, 3, whatever, right? Now we can print my list. And this will just print out the actual list. If we want to print out a specific item from our list, we could, my list, and then use our notation like this. If we want to print out the first item, that's 0. Lists and arrays always start at 0. So this is the 0th item, 1th item, and then 2th item, right? So 0, 1, 2. And that's all there is to it. So let's go ahead and save this, head over to our terminal. I'm in my C Dart stuff directory, and let's run dart list.dart. And we can see it just prints out the actual list and then the 0th item, which is 1, right? Okay, pretty simple, pretty straightforward as you would expect. So let's say we want to change one of these items. We want to change this 1 to 41. Well, super easy. We just call my list, pass in the item we want to change. We want to change the 0th item. We can change that to 41. Now we can come up here and print our list again to make sure that that actually happened. Run this guy, and we can see it used to be 1, now it's 41. Pretty simple. We can also create an empty list. So let's go var empty list and set that equal to nothing. We can print this guy out if we want. When we do, head back over here, run this guy again, we can see we've got an empty list. So, all right, that's cool. One of the nice things about growable lists, we can start with an empty one and then we can add stuff to it later on, right? So if we want to add something to our empty list, we could just call empty list and we use the .add function. And then let's just add something, the number 41, right? So if we want to print this guy again, come back over here, we can see it had nothing in it. Now it has 41 in it. Pretty cool. That's how to add one thing to a list. What if we want to add multiple things, right? You think, well, can I just do something like this? No, you can't. Not quite. What we're going to want to do here is use the add all function. So we call our empty list dot add all. Notice the second A here in all is capitalized. And then inside of here, we're going to pass in a bracketed list. So we can go 1, 2, 3. So this will start out with 41 and then add 1, 2, 3. And we need our semicolon there. And if we want to save this and run it, we can head back over here and let's run this guy. We can see it started out with 0. We added one item, it's 41. Then we added a bunch of items, 41, 1, 2, 3. And you'll notice these 1, 2, 3, we put them in brackets when we use the add all, but when they're in the actual array, they're not sort of separated in their own bracket. They're just part of the main list, the main array. So, okay, that's cool. So we added things here, but we can also add things at specific positions inside of our list. Remember, lists or arrays are indexed items. So they're index numbers. So we can choose which index number to place an item if we want to place an item. And we do that using insert. Let's come back up here to our main list, which was 1, 2, 3. And then we change the first one to 41. Let's come down here and let's go mylist.insert. And here we pass in the position and the item. So remember our my list, there's 0, 1, 2. If we want to add something to the end, that would be at position 3. And we can add something like, the number 900, something like that. Here we can now print my list, see if that worked. Back over here, run this guy again. And we see, sure enough, at the end, we added 900. Here's our original list. And then we changed it to this. And then we changed it finally to this, right? So if you, want to add something in a specific spot, you can use that. You can also insert many things with insert all, sort of like we had add and add all. We also have insert and insert all. So we could go mylist.insert all. And the same thing, you add in the position you want to put it in. So if we want to put it at the 1th position, which is the 2nd position, remember, and then inside of here, again, we just create a sort of list. And we could go 99, 98, 97, I don't know, whatever. And then let's just print my list. Head back over here. Let's clear the screen, run this guy. And you can see here in the 1th position, we've added 99, 98, 97. So we've got 41, 99, 98, 97, 2, 3, and then 900. So that's cool. And also, before we go on here, you can also have mixed lists. Up until now, we've just been using integers just because it's easy to do, but you can create a list with mixed data types. So you can have integers, you can have strings, you can have booleans, you can have anything you want, right? So let's create a mixed list very quickly. Let's just call it mixed list. And we want to set that equal to 1, 2, 3, and then, I don't know, John and Bob, right? So here we can print out mixed list. Save this guy, head back over here, run it again. And we see 1, 2, 3, John and Bob. So that's cool. So moving on, we can also remove items from a list. So let's take out John, right? So that's very easy. We just go mixed list dot remove, and then just pass in whatever we want to remove. So we can take out John. Now this works fine if there's only one John in here, right? So keep that in mind. So if we want to now print this guy out again, let me just kind of copy this, save this, head back over here, run this guy. We see here we have John. In here, John has been removed. Well, okay, that's great. Like I said, if there's only one John, but if there's more than one John, you need the specific location to remove, right? So we could do that using remove at. So let's go mixed list dot remove at, and here we just pass in the index number that we want to remove. So we've got let's say we want to take out this 2. That's the 0th item. We just pass in the 1th item like that. We can print this guy out again onto the screen and see if 2 has been removed. Sure enough, 1, 3, and Bob. We had a 2, we took it out, and now it's gone. So those are lists in Dart. Pretty easy, pretty simple, pretty straightforward, very easy to use, and that's all there is to it. In this video, we're going to look at maps in darts, and maps are key value pairs. So if you're coming from Python, a map is a dictionary, right? Same exact process. And they're very easy to create and use in Dart, and that's what we're going to do in this video. So let's head over to our code. I'm using the Sublime Text Editor in the Git Bash terminal as always. And as always, you can find a link to the code in the pinned comment section below, as well as a link to the Dart playlist with all the other Dart videos in this series. So check that out if you haven't so far. So I've got our basic Dart starter code. I'm calling this maps.dart. And these are the things we're going to look at in this video: how to create a map, how to show the values, the keys, get the length, how to add something, how to add many things, how to remove something, and how to remove everything. So to create a map in Dart, we just use the var keyword and then just name it. I'm going to call this toppings. So we're going to create a map with pizza toppings. So everybody's favorite pizza topping, right? So we start out with John. John is the key. Remember, these are key value pairs. They're two things that are paired together. So we separate them by colons. So John's favorite pizza is, let's say, pepperoni. So that's one item in our map, right? The next one, let's say Mary. And let's say Mary likes cheese pizza. And that's it. That's all there is to it. So now we can print our toppings if we like. That will print the entire map, or we can pull out a specific item from our map. So we can print toppings, and then we use the square brackets, and then just pass in the key that you want to print out. So if we want to see what John's favorite pizza is, we just pass in John. So let's go ahead and save this, head over to our terminal. I'm in my C Dart stuff directory, and let's just run Dart, maps.dart. And you can see, first time we print out the entire map, we get the squiggly brackets and all. Here we just print out John's favorite pizza. You see John likes pepperoni. Sure enough, John likes pepperoni. So super easy to do, and that's kind of all there is to it. Now, we can also see the values. The first things are the keys. The second things are the values. So pepperoni and cheese, those are our values. If we want to print out just those values, we can go toppings.values. Pretty simple. Go ahead and save this, head back over here and run it. You can see it prints out pepperoni and cheese. We can do the same thing with our keys. We can print out toppings.keys. And this is going to print out, John and Mary. If we go ahead and save this, run this guy again, sure enough, John and Mary. If we're curious how many items, how many things are in our map, we could always just print out toppings.length, which is very useful. Save this, run it again. We see there's 2 items. 2 key value pairs, 1, 2. All right, that makes sense. Pretty simple. So let's say we want to add something. So we've got our toppings, and let's say we want to add Tim, right? So what does Tim like? I don't know, Tim likes sausage. So then if we print out toppings, make sure that was added, head back over here, clear the screen, run this again. We could see originally here's our map, then we added Tim, and now here's our map. Tim has been added. Pretty simple. We can add many things, and we use this, and to do this, we use the toppings.addAll function. And inside of here, we pass curly brackets, And then basically we just create another map in this function and it will add it to our old map. So if we have, for instance, Tina, maybe Tina likes bacon on her pizza. And let's say maybe we have Steve, and Steve likes supreme pizza. I don't know, whatever. Now we can print our toppings to see if all of those things got added. Head back over here, run this again, and we can see, oh man, it's getting big. So we did have John, Mary, and Tim, and we added Tina and Steve. So that's cool. If we want to remove something, we can do that using the remove function. So let's just go toppings, .remove. And let's say we want to get rid of Steve. We just pass in Steve with quotation marks. And we can print our toppings just to make sure Steve was removed. Back over here, run this guy again. So here we see Steve. Then we removed him, printed it out again. No more Steve. So that's pretty cool. Finally, we can remove everything. So let's just go toppings.clear. And that's just a function. And now if we want to print our toppings, we could see, hopefully this will remove everything. Back over here, run this guy again. We see we just get an empty little brackety thing there because everything's been removed. So those are maps in Dart, key value pairs, very easy to use, super useful. You're going to use those for absolutely everything. They're a cornerstone of all programming. All programming languages have maps or dictionaries or hashes, sometimes they're called. Key value pairs, whatever you call them, they all act the same way. And that's how you do it in Dart. In this video, we're going to look at loops in Dart, and we're going to look at for loops, the for in loop, and the while loop. And loops are, of course, a fundamental thing of all programming languages. They allow you to loop through things and do things over and over again for a certain amount of time, or a certain number of times, or whatever you want to do in your loop. So let's head over to our code. I'm using the Sublime Text Editor and the Git Bash terminal as always. And as always, you can find a link to the code in the pinned comment section below, as well as a link to the playlist with all the other Dart videos in this series. So check that out if you haven't so far. All right, so I've got some basic Dart starter code that we always have, and I'm just calling this loops.dart. So let's start out with a for loop. And we're going to start out by creating a variable. I'm just going to call it num. And then let's set it equal to like 5. We want our loop to loop 5 times, right? So we create a variable for that. Now you don't have to create a variable. You can use a number, but it's kind of standard to use a variable. So that's what we're going to do. So let's go for. So inside of here, we need to create sort of like a counter variable to keep track of how many times we've looped. So I'm going to call this I. That's sort of, normal. And let's set I equal to our num, right? Now, instead of setting it equal to num, because we've got the variable num, you could just, set it equal to 5, but, it's kind of standard to use a variable here. Next, we need to say, what are we actually kind of looking for in our loop? So let's go, as long as I is greater than or equal to 1, we want to keep looping, right? Now, every time we want to go I minus minus, this will subtract 1 from I. So I starts out at 5, we loop through, I becomes 4. We loop through again, I becomes 3. We loop through again, I becomes 2. We loop through again, I becomes 1. I is still greater than or equal to 1, so we loop through again, I becomes 0, at which point I is no longer greater than or equal to 1, and the whole thing stops, right? Basic loop structure. So next we use our brackets, and inside of here we do whatever we want to do while we're looping. So let's just print out I, right? All right, that's it. That's all there is to it. Very simple. Go ahead and save this. Head over to our terminal in my C Dart stuff directory, and let's run Dart loops.dart. And when we do, it prints out 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? Exactly what we would expect to happen. So very cool, very easy, and that's all there is to it. Now, a lot of times when you're using a for loop, you're going to want to do it to iterate over something. So you've got an array or a variable or some list of something you want to iterate through a certain amount of times. Well, for that, you're going to use the for in loop. So let's create a quick array, and I'm just going to call it names. And let's just add 2 or 3 names here. So we've got John, we've got Tina, and we've got, say, Steve, right? And we want to iterate through this list and print out each item in the list, in the array, right? Well, we can use the for in loop. So let's go for. Now we need to keep track of each item that we iterate through. So we're going to create a variable. Let's call it name. Since this is an array of names, I'm going to use the singular name. We could just as easily call it X, right? But be descriptive. Let's say for name in names. So this is our names array. This is the for in loop. See the in right there. And that's all there is to it. So what do we want to do? Well, let's just print each name, right? So let's go ahead and save this. Head over here, run this guy. And we see John, Tina, and Steve. Pretty cool, pretty easy. And personally, I'll use a for in loop more often than I'll use a regular for loop, because when you want to loop, oftentimes you want to loop over something, you know? Here we've got an array. We want to loop through the array and print out everything, do something with each item in the array. You'd use your for in loop for that. So, all right, that's the for in loop. Finally, we have the while loop. And this one's really easy. We just call while. And let's say while our num is greater than or equal to 1. Remember, our num is up here. It's still 5. We can use that again. And then we just do whatever we want to do. So we can print, for instance, num. Now, you'll get an infinite loop if you do this because we're not changing our counter, right? So we need to change our counter. Let's go num minus minus. So every time we loop, we want to subtract 1. So then eventually we'll get the same things up here. It'll start out at 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then it becomes 0. 0 is not greater than or equal to 1, and the whole thing stops, right? So, okay, pretty simple. Go ahead and save this. Head back over here. Run this guy one more time. And we see, sure enough, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then it stops. And that's all there is to it. So those are the main loops in Dart. There are some other loops as well. There's a do while loop that's basically a while loop that's a little bit different. I never used that. I don't know anybody that's ever used that. I've never seen that in code, so I'm not going to talk about it. But if you're interested, you can Google the do while loop in Dart. Most programming languages have a do while loop. I never teach it in any programming language because, I don't know, these three will get you through like 99.9% of anything you would ever want to do. So that's what we do. In this video, we're going to look at logic in Dart. But before we get started, if you like this video and want to see more like it, be sure to smash the like button below, subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up for the YouTube algorithm, and check out Codemy.com, where I have dozens of courses with thousands of videos that teach you to code. Use coupon code YouTube50 to get 50% off memberships, all my courses, videos, and books for one-time fee, which is insanely cheap. Okay, like I said, in this video, we're going to look at logic in Dart. If statements, if else statements, if else if statements, right? So super easy with Dart. This is just a core fundamental computer programming concept. All programming languages have logic, if statements, things like that. And in Dart, they're pretty straightforward and they're pretty easy to use. So let's head over to our code. I'm using the Sublime Text Editor in the Git Bash terminal as always. And as always, you can find a link to the code in the pinned comment section below, as well as a link to the playlist with all the other Dart videos in this series. So check that out if you haven't so far. So we've got our basic Dart starter code, and I'm just calling it logic.dart. So let's start out by creating a variable. I'm just going to call it num. And let's just set it equal to 5. So let's start out with a basic if statement, which will allow us to basically check for some condition, ask some sort of question, and then take some action based on the answer, right? Basic logic. So let's go if, and we use our brackets, and now we set our condition. So let's say if num equals, and we use the double equal to sign, it's pretty common in all programming languages. If it equals 5, then we want to do something. And we use our brackets to show what do we want to do. Well, let's just print to the screen. I don't know, the number is 5, right? So whatever. We can go ahead and save this, head over to our terminal. I'm in my C Dart stuff directory, and let's run Dart, logic.dart, and we see, hey, the number is 5, which, makes sense because we know our number is 5. If we change this to 3, save this, run it again, nothing at all is going to happen. You can see just nothing happens at all because our number didn't equal 5, right? Our number is 3. So if this is true, then this will get executed. If this is false, then it will skip down to right here, the outside of this bracket here, and then just continue on with the program. We don't have anything else in our program, so it just sort of ends, right? So that's a basic if statement. Let's go ahead and change this back to 5. We can also use an if-else statement. And this allows us to take some other action if the first statement isn't true. If this is false, do something else, right? An else statement. So to do that, we just call else. We can then do something else. The number is not 5, right? So if we save this, what do you think is going to happen? The exact same thing as before. It's just going to say the number is 5. But if we come back here and change our number to something else, say 4 or whatever, save this, come back over here, run it again. Now it says the number is not 5. And we can get really fancy with this if we want. We can say the number is, and then, and we can, stick our num in there or something like that. Come back over here, run this again. We can say, hey, the number is 4, right? So very fancy, very sophisticated, right? And that's all there is to it. So I'm going to change this back to the number is not 5. There we go. So that's if else statement. We can also do an if else if, which allows us to ask more than one question, right? So here we're just asking one question. Is num equal to 5, right? We can do other things as well. So I'm going to take this down here. And then after this, we just call else if, and then we could do another condition, right? So to do that, we just, again, use our brackets. We could say, hey, this time test to see if num equals 3. I don't know, right? And if it does, then print out the number is 3, right? And then we can bring this back up here. So we still have our else statement. And that's all there is to it. So if we look at this, we could say, change this to 3. We say, hey, is the number 5? If it is, print out the number is 5. Well, it's not. So it's going to skip this, and it's going to come down here to this line. Let's put this up here. And then it's going to say, oh, well, we've got another condition here. Is the num equal to 3? If it is, print this out and then stop. If it's not, follow along down, start with this line right here, and then the number is not 5. So if we go ahead and save this, we can pretty much guess what's going to happen here. We can say the number is 3. And we could play around with this. We could change this back to 5. If we do that, it's going to say, hey, the number's 5, of course. And we could change this to 51, right? Come back over here, save this. Hey, the number is not 5. Or if we really wanted to, we could get crazy and say the number is not 3 or 5. It is, and then we could put in our num. All right, go ahead and save this, run it. Clear the screen. The number is not 3 or 5. It is 51. A silly example, but I think you get the picture. Very easy to use logic with Dart, as it is in most programming languages. Now we're using the equal to here. We can use all of our comparison operators, right? So you can use greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, not equal, and all of that. So, you could say, hey, is number greater than 5? Well, in this case, it is. It's 51. And you get the picture. Or greater than or equal to 5, right? Whatever. That's how that works. So that's logic with Dart. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and pretty fun. In this video, we're going to look at functions in Dart, and functions are a super important part of any programming, especially if you do functional programming versus class-based programming, and they're pretty simple to do in Dart. So let's head over to our code. I'm using the Sublime Text Editor and the Git Bash terminal as always. And as always, you can find a link to the code in the pinned comment section below, as well as a link to the playlist with all the other Dart videos in this series. So check that out if you haven't so far. So we've got our basic Dart starter code. I'm calling it func.dart. And now we just want to create a function. So I'm going to call it my func, right? And then we need parentheses and then brackets. And inside of the brackets, we could do whatever we want to do in this function. So let's just say print hello functions. Very interesting, right? Exclamation part. So that's a function. Now, if we save this, head over to our terminal and run dart func.dart, nothing happens. And that's because with functions, they only get run if you specifically call them. And we didn't specifically call this function. We just sort of defined it here. So to call a function, you just name it. So my func, and you use your parentheses, and that's it. So now this will call the function. It should print out hello functions onto the screen, and that's that. So let's come back over here, run this guy again, and sure enough, it says hello functions. So here we're printing hello functions. We could just as easily return hello functions. Now, if we run this, nothing's going to happen. Run it again, nothing happened. Why? Well, because in this instance here, we're returning this. We're not doing anything with it. So if we wanted to actually print that, we would have to wrap this entire thing in a print function. Then it would print out what it has returned here, which is that text. So now if we head back over here, it's going to say hello functions. Likewise, we could make this into a variable. So we could say var, I don't know, thing, and set it equal to my func. Right? Again, same thing. If we ran this again, nothing's going to happen because we've just assigned it to this variable. We didn't actually do anything with it. So if we wanted to do something, we could, for instance, print out thing. If we did that and ran it, then now it's going to print out hello functions again. So just your basic function stuff. Now, there's all kinds of different things we could do with functions here. We're just sort of, this is a very boring function. It just says, hello functions, right? So instead, we could create some variables and pass those things into it. So let's say we want to create a string and we're going to call it name. Now inside of here, instead of saying hello functions, we could say hello name. Now down here, when we call our function, we have to pass in a name, right? And since this is a string, this has to be a string. So now this will pass in the string John into our function. It will assign it to this variable name, and then inside of this function, we can use that variable in any way that we want. So now if we save this and run it, it's going to say hello John. Very cool, right? Basic functionality for a function. All right, that was a terrible joke. So, we could pass more than one thing. If we also want to pass in Bill, now we have to create two things up here. So let's call this name1 and name2. And here we could pass in name1. If we save this and run it, nothing really is going to change because you see it says hello John, because in our function here, we only use name1. We could also say and name2. Now when we do this, it's going to say hello John and Bill. And that's cool. Now, if we leave off something when we pass the stuff originally into our function, for instance, if we leave off Bill, we're going to get an error because our function is expecting two positional arguments and we're only passing one. So keep that in mind. Now, there are ways around this. You can use optional positional parameters. And to do that, you use brackets. You just wrap your thing in a bracket. So now, if we save this, there isn't a name2, but name2 is optional. So our function will assign null to name2. So if we run this now, it's going to say hello John and null, right? So hello John and null. That's kind of cool. That's what's called a positional parameter because this is the second position, I guess. You could create a named parameter as well, right? To do that, we use curly brackets. But now when we call our function, we need to sort of take this variable into account. So we need to account for it and say, hey, for name2, use Bill, right? So this will add this to that, and this should print out hello, John and Bill. Hello, John and Bill. But likewise, if we don't pass anything, if we don't pass a Bill in, if we save this and run it, let's clear the screen. It again says hello, John and null. So that's cool. It's not great. You don't want these nulls floating around necessarily, unless you want to do logic inside your function. Then you could test to see if there's a null. If there is a null, act a certain way. If there's not, act a different way. So you could do that, or you could just create defaults. So to use a default, we come up here, and right here, when we're defining our function, we could say name, and the default we'll say is friends, right? So now we haven't passed in a name2. So it will give name2 the value of friends. So now if we save this and run it, it'll say hello, John and friends, right? So that's cool. But then down here, if we, did the same thing as we did earlier and said, hey, have name2 Bill, it will ignore the default and it will assign whatever you've told it to assign into name2. So if we save this and run it, it should say hello, John and Bill. And sure enough, it does. And there we go. So those are functions in a very quick nutshell, very easy with Dart, as in most programming languages. Functions are usually a little easier to wrap your brain around than like classes and objects and things. That's why most programmers are functional programmers like this, and not as many class and object-oriented programmers out there, because this is just super easy and it does everything you would want it to do. So those are functions with Dart, pretty simple, and that's all there is to it. In this video, we're going to talk about getting user input with Dart. So allowing the user to type stuff in and then doing something with whatever they typed in. So let's head over to our code. I'm using the Sublime Text Editor and the Git Bash terminal as always. And as always, you can find a link to the code in the pinned comment section below, as well as a link to the playlist with all the other Dart videos in this series. So check that out if you haven't so far. So I've got our basic Dart starter code that we always have, and I'm calling this in.dart, short for input, I guess. And the first thing we need to do is import a library that will handle input-output type stuff in Dart. And so we just come up here to the top and import, and it's just from Dart. We want to import IO. So that's all there is to that. Now we can use input-output stuff in our program. So let's start out by just printing to the screen, enter your name. And now we want to allow the user to enter their name. So let's create a variable, and there's a couple of ways we can do this I'll talk about in a second. We'll just start with the normal way by saying var, and then let's name it. We'll call it name because we're asking for their name. And now we set this equal to stdin, standard input, and then dot, we want to read line sync. And this is synchronous. You could also do asynchronous, but we're not going to deal with that in this video. We're just going to read line sync. So this will take whatever the user types onto the screen, assign it to this name variable, and now we can do stuff with it. So, we could print hello and then just print out that name. Let's go ahead and save this and run it, see what that looks like. So I'm in my c/dart stuff directory. Let's run dart in.dart. And it says enter your name. I could type in John. It says hello, John. So a couple of important things. This is going to take in a string, right? It doesn't take in a variable. You can even try, we could go like int number equals and then, do this whole thing. It's not going to allow you to do that for several different reasons. One, this just takes in strings. Two, there's some interesting things around nullability here. So, this is one way to create a variable using var. We can also define the thing right away. So string name equals, and then if we copied all this stuff, if we try to run this in the normal way, we're going to get an error. So let's take a look at that. So if we run this again, we get an error because you'll see a value of type string ? Which I'll talk about in a second, can't be assigned to a variable of type just regular string because string ? is nullable and string isn't. So nullable means can be null. Like, for instance, if the user doesn't type in anything and just hits enter, that's null. Well, a string can't be null, but a string with a ? at the end of it can, right? So in this case, if you wanted to do it like this, we'd have to come back here and just very simply change this to string ? So if we did that and run it, it's going to work just fine. Hello, John, right? So likewise, integer can't be null, right? You can't have a null number. So that's one of the reasons why you can't take an integer to use this method. But what you can do is take this, input it as a string, and then convert that string to an integer. And we'll probably talk about that in the next video when we talk about changing data types. But for now, this will work just fine. Just realize this is for strings. And for right now, strings only, but pretty simple and pretty straightforward. And really, that's all there is to it. In this video, we're going to convert strings and integers and doubles to each other. So if we've got a string, we'll convert it to an integer. If we've got an integer, we'll convert it to a string, and we'll do the same thing with doubles. So let's head over to our code. I'm using the Sublime Text Editor and the Git Bash terminal as always. And as always, you can find a link to the code in the pinned comment section below, as well as a link to the playlist with all the other Dart videos in this series. So check that out if you haven't so far. So we've got our basic Dart starter code that we've always got. I'm calling it convert.dart. So let's just create some variables, and we could just call them A, B, and C. And let's set A equal to an integer. Let's set B equal to a string. Notice it's in quotation marks. And now let's take C and add those two together. Now, normally we couldn't add those two together because you can't add an integer and a string together. So we have to convert this string to an integer if we want to add these two together. Here, let's say string to int. So to do that, we can set C equal to A plus, so we need to convert our string here to an integer, and we can do that using the parse function. So we want to change this to an integer, so we call int.parse, and then pass in whatever we want to parse. So we want to parse B. All right, so here, if we want to make sure this worked okay, let's say A plus B equals C. And if this works, this should say 40 plus 1 equals 41. If it doesn't, we'll just get an error. So let's save this and run it. Head over to our terminal. I'm in my C Dart stuff directory, and let's run dart convert.dart, and we see 40 plus 1 equals 41. So clearly our string has been converted successfully to an integer. So that's cool. It's pretty simple. We could do the same thing for string to double. Let's go var D, E, and F. And let's set D equal to 40. Let's set E equal to, 0.1. And again, that's a string. And let's set F equal to D plus, and instead of int.parse, now it's going to be double.parse. And we want to pass in E. This will convert our E, which is this string, to a double. So now, again, we can go print D plus E equals F. Now if we save this, head back over to our terminal, run this guy again, we see 40 plus 0.1 equals 40.1, which is what we would expect if this string got converted to a double, which it did, and it added. So super simple, and it's really all there is to it. Now we want to convert an integer to a string, and this is a little bit different. So let's go var G, H, and I don't know, And let's set G equal to 40. Let's set H equal to a string of 1. And now let's set I equal to, now we want to not convert this, we want to convert this integer to a string. And to do that, we use the toString function. So just call our variable that we want to convert, G, and then just go .toString. And that's a function. And that's it. And then we want to add in H. So this is 40 and 1. Now these are going to be two strings, right? So if we print this out, and let's say G plus H equals I, this should be 40 a string plus 1 a string equals I a string. So when you add two strings together, they just sort of mush them together. They concatenate it, right? So this should equal 401. We're not doing actual math. We're just smushing them together. So if this works, if this 40 has been converted to a string, we should get, 401. Let's see if that works. Let's save this, head back over to our terminal, run this guy one more time. And sure enough, 40 plus 1 equals 401, because again, we're not doing math. These are both strings. We just smush them together and we get 401. So you can do the same thing with doubles. I'm not going to do an example of that. So, we could go like this. This should be 40.11 if we run this. So we head back over here real quick, run this guy one more time. Sure enough, 40.11. So I'm just going to go ahead and change that back. So super easy to convert integers and strings to each other. Same thing for doubles with Dart. And that's all there is to it. In this video, we're going to look at type conversion for user input. Now, a couple of videos ago, we did user input. So users could enter things, right? And then in the last video, we looked at type conversion, switching from integers to strings and vice versa. In this video, I'm going to put both of those things together because it's not as easy as you might think. You would think that you could just take user input and convert it the way we looked at in the last video, but that's not the case. There's a snafu that we need to talk about, and that's what we're going to look at in this video. So head over to our code. I'm using the Sublime Text Editor in the Git Bash terminal as always. And as always, you can find a link to the code in the pinned comment section below, as well as a link to the playlist with all the other Dart videos in this series. So check that out if you haven't so far. So I've got our basic Dart starter code. I'm calling it inconvert.dart, short for input convert, I guess. I don't know. And of course, we're going to get user input. So we know the first thing we need to do is import our Dart::io for input output. Okay. And then let's just come down here and real quick, let's just print, enter a number. And then we want to get user input. So let's create a variable. I'm just going to call it nummy, short for number, I guess. And then we want to stdin.readLine_sync, just like we learned 2 videos ago. Check that video out if you didn't see it. And then normally we could print out, just nummy, and everything is good. Now, if we wanted to print out nummy plus 10, we're going to get an error. So let's save this and run it just to make sure. Head over to our terminal in my C Dart stuff directory, and let's run Dart inconvert.dart, and we get a couple of different errors here. Now, the first thing is when you're taking user input using this method, it's bringing it in as a string. So right off the bat, we know we're going to get an error because you can't add 10 to a string. It would make it, you can't actually add that way. So the second problem we're getting is that, if we look at this real quick, we've got this string question mark thing again. And remember, whenever we're bringing in user input, it has to not be null. And that's what this string question mark says. It allows it to be null or not. Now, you can't add a number to a null, right? Because, if something doesn't exist, you can't add 10 to it because that doesn't make sense. It doesn't exist. It's null. So what we can do is use the double question mark operator, which it's the if null operator. So basically what it does is it runs a little logic. It says, hey, if it's null, change it to something else. And that's what we're going to do. So let's come up here. First, let's create another variable. And I'm just going to call this nummy2. And that's going to equal nummy1 plus 10. But of course, we know we can't do that. So first of all, this is a string. So we learned in the last video, we can convert it with int.parse. And then we can wrap this in like that. That will turn it into an integer. In theory, then we can add 10, but not really. Because if we save this and run it, again, we're going to get this same error, this same string error. Oh, no, we've got now 3 errors. So, did I forget? Yeah, I forgot. All right. We need our semicolon. Right. So, all right, let's clear the screen. Now, okay, we still get 1. We get all kinds of errors. But again, that's because we can't convert this because it might be null. So how do we fix this? Again, we use the double question mark operator, and then we tell it, hey, if it is null, change it to, I don't know, 0. Or you could just leave it to blank, but we're doing numbers here, so let's change it to 0. So if somebody doesn't enter anything into the keyboard, we're going to assume that's a 0, right? So now this will turn it into something that can be converted into an integer. This will then convert it into an integer, and this will then print it out. So we can come down here and we can say, I don't know, nummy plus 10 equals nummy 2. And if this works, it should, work. Right? So let's run this guy again. Uh-oh. All the errors this morning. All right. So, num2, nummy2. There we go. Whew. I'll tell you. It's Thursday. Okay. Enter a number. 41. 41 plus 10 equals 51. And it works. Let's try it again just to make sure. Right? Let's say 100. 100 plus 10 equals 110. And we're good to go. So again, just remember when you're taking in user input, it has to account for nullability, right? Because the user might not enter anything. It might be null. So that's why we use this question mark if null operator. Basically, it's sort of shorthand for logic in this little parentheses right here. It's basically saying, hey, if this is null, change it to that, right? Or I suppose you could do it like that too, right? If it is null, it'll change it to 0. If it's not null, it'll just keep it what it is. In our case, whatever the user entered, if they entered in a number, 41, for instance, it'll keep it at 41. Then this will parse it into an integer to which we can then add 10. So a little complicated, not too bad. And that's all there is to it. In this video, we're going to do FizzBuzz in Dart. And FizzBuzz is sort of a traditional interview question. If you go on coding interviews, it was popular 10, 15 years ago. I don't know if they're still using it. Probably not, because it's fairly simple, but that's what we're going to do in this video. So FizzBuzz is basically a little exercise where they ask you to print out the numbers between 1 and 100. If any of those numbers is divisible by 3, also print out fizz. If it's divisible by 5, also print out buzz. If it's divisible by both 3 and 5, print out FizzBuzz. So you're going to have 100 numbers printed on the terminal. Some of them will have fizz next to them. Some of them will have buzz next to them. Some of them will have FizzBuzz next to them. Some of them will just have the number. So that's what we're going to do using Dart. So let's head over to our code. I'm using the Sublime Text Editor and the Git Bash terminal as always. And as always, you can find a link to the code in the pinned comment section below, as well as a link to the playlist with all the other Dart videos in this series. So check that out if you haven't so far. So the first thing we need to do is obviously just create a variable. So let's go int. And we'll call this num, and let's set it equal to 1, right? Because we want to print out between 1 and 100. So if you wanted to print out the numbers between 1 and 100, how would you do that? Well, lots of different ways to do that. I'm just going to use a little while loop. It's quick, it's easy, we know how to do it. So let's create a while loop. Let's go while, and let's go while num is less than or equal to 100. Now, we want to use less than or equal to because we also want to include 100, so less than or equal to. And then inside of here, we just want to print out num. Now, this is a while loop. We also need to increment our counter or else we're just going to get an infinite loop. So let's go num plus plus. And here, let's just say increment the counter, right? So let's go ahead and save this and run it just to make sure that worked right. I'm saving this as fizz.dart. Let's head over to our terminal. I'm in my C Dart stuff directory, and let's run fizz.dart. When we do, we see boom, 1 through 100. So, all right, that looks pretty good. So far, so good. So now let's get into some logic here. And let me just get rid of this because we don't actually want to do that yet. So we've done logic already. We could do an if statement. So let's say if, and let's start with the FizzBuzz category. So if a number is divisible by both 3 and 5, we want to print out FizzBuzz. Well, how do we know if a number is divisible? Well, we talked about our operators way back when. One of them is the modulus, right? That returns a remainder. So we could say if num modulus 5 equals 0, and our double and signs, that allows us to make two conditional statements, right? And num modulus 3 equals 0. Well, then we want to print, and let's just go num, let's put a period, and let's go FizzBuzz. So that should work. Now we can do else ifs for all the other conditions. So we could just knock each of these out. So let me just copy this. So if num modulus 3 equals 0, well, that is, and let me just copy this thing so we don't have to keep typing this out. So if num modulus 3 equals 0, that's fizz, right? We can do another else if num modulus 5 equals 0, then that's going to be what? Buzz. And finally, we have else. We just want to print out the num, right? So let's go ahead and save this and run it. I think that's kind of all there is to it. Pretty simple, right? Let's head back over here, run this guy again. And boom, looks like it worked. Let's spot check this. So 3, that's fizz. 5, that's buzz, obviously. 9, fizz. 10, buzz. 15 is our first fizz buzz. It's divisible by both 3 and 5. You can divide 15 by 3. You can divide 15 by 5. So we get fizz buzz. Same thing for 30, fizz buzz. This looks good. Spot checking this throughout. I think we've done it. There we go. So pretty simple. We've done this in lots of other programming languages. This is just sort of a fun little program you would do. Like I said, they used to be an interview question. I think interview questions are a little bit harder than this these days, but back in the day, this was an interview question and pretty simple. Now, this is not the only way to do this. You could use different loops. You could do different logic. You could do all kinds of different things. So give this a try. Try to do it a different way than this. Try and do less lines of code, maybe make it a little more elegant, play around with it, see if you can make a better solution with less lines of code, like I said, and have some fun with it. All right, guys, like I said, in this video, we're going to start to look at classes with Dart. But before we get started, if you like this video and want to see more like it, be sure to smash the like button below, subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up for the YouTube algorithm, and check out Codemy.com, where I have dozens of courses with thousands of videos that teach you to code. Use coupon code YouTube50 to get 50% off membership to all my courses, videos, and books for one-time fee, which is insanely cheap. Okay, like I said, in this video, we're going to start to look at classes in Dart. Now, obviously, classes is a gigantic area to talk about, and so we're just going to sort of start to talk about it in this video, create some very basic classes, give you the groundwork of how this works, and kind of move on from there. So if we head over to our code, I'm using the Sublime Text Editor in the Git Bash terminal, as always. And as always, you can find a link to the code in the pinned comment section below, as well as a link to the playlist with all the other Dart videos in this series. So check that out if you haven't so far. So I've got a file. It's just our basic Dart starter code, and I'm calling it c.dart. And what I want to do is create a person class. Now, if you're not familiar with object-oriented programming and classes in general, just a very, very quick overview. A class allows you to create an object, which is basically a blueprint. So you can define some object of reality into a program. So if you want to define a person, well, what does a person have? Well, they might have a name, an age, a height, a sex, a address, phone number, whatever you want to define in your object is your class, you can do. You could sort of create a blueprint of a person. If you want to create a hat blueprint, right? You know, what are hats? What sort of things define hats? Well, the size, large, medium, small, the color, the shape, the whatever. So anytime you have a thing you want to sort of map out into a program, you can use a class to do that. Just a very basic overview of a class. So to create a class, we come outside of our main guy right here, and we use this class keyword, and then a class name is always capitalized. So if we want to create a person, it's capital P, right? So inside of here, we can define sort of the roadmap of what our class is going to map out, right? So I'm going to say a string, and I'm going to make this question mark because, you know, the nullable thing we talked about a few videos ago. And our person is going to have a name. It's also going to have a sex, let's say. And then we also want an integer, also not nullable. And, you know, let's call this age. So we're just going to keep this person very simple. They're just going to have 3 things, name, sex, and age, right? Very easy. So now we need to create a constructor. So let's call this constructor. And here I'm going to use the same name as our class right here. Now you'll notice this is not like void person. It's just flat out person. And then inside of here, we need to define these things that we're going to be passing in here for each person. So we're going to have a string for a name, sex, and then we also have an integer of age, right? So then inside of here, we need to define what we're going to be doing is passing these things. So name, John, sex, male, age, 44. So we need to match those up to these things here. So here we just call name equals name, sex equals sex, and age equals age. Now, not so fast. Which one are we talking about here? Name, is it this name or is it this name? You know, how does that work? Well, quite simply, this will equal this, if we use the this keyword, I guess. So we need to call this dot for each of these things, right? So this is basically, hey, take this that we passed into this constructor here and assign it to this, which is this, right? So these things here are these things up here, right? Okay, so strictly speaking, this is pretty much all we really need. This is sort of our blueprint. We've defined what it means to be a person in this program. Person has a name, they have a sex, and they have an age, right? Well, okay, that's great, but now let's create a method that does something with this information. Now, methods are basically functions. We call them functions when they're not in a class. When they're in a class, we call them methods. Same thing though, right? So we can do our void thing here. And let's say we want to show data, I don't know, or show person or whatever. Let's just say show data. And now we can do something. So let's just, print out, and let's say name equals name. And let's also print out sex equals sex. And we also want to print out age equals age, right? So now we can call this method and it will print out these things for each of our persons, people, whatever. Okay, so we've defined all this stuff. Now let's actually create one in our program. So let's come up here to the top, and to create one of these, we call our person class, and then we name this. Let's say person one, right? P1, and that's going to be a person. And now inside of here, we need to pass in who P1 is, right? So P1 will be John. John is male, and he is 44 years old, right? Now notice John, male, and 44 need to be in the same order as name, sex, and age right here. If we swap these around, things are going to get confusing. And since we have different data types, strings and integers, that's going to flummox the whole thing, right? So, okay, we've created this. Now we can do something. So let's go p1 dot show data, right? So this will call this method, which will take these things which have been assigned in to this p1 person, and it will print them out if we've done this all correctly, right? So let's go ahead and save this, head over to our terminal. I'm in my C Dart stuff directory, and let's run dart c.dart, and we get John, male, 44, which is exactly what we would expect because that's what's printed out here. Very cool. Now, we can at any time call anything from our P1 person, and we can print out anything from P1 that we want. So let's say we want to print out P1.name. Now we can access any of the things in here. So .name, we can access .sex, .age, whatever we want, but let's just start with .name. Head back over here, run this guy again, and boom, it prints out John. Very cool. Instead of doing it like this, we can kind of play around with this if we want. Another way to do this, we could say print person's name is, and you can use these brackets here to call name. They are same deal here. Let's just go sex. Just another way to do this. And age, years old, ... Right? So if we wanted to do it like that, we could. If we come back over here, well, we actually still have to come up here and then call p1.showData. If we did that, come back over here, run this guy again. We see the person's name is John, they are male and 44 years old, right? And we're still printing out John there. So anyway you want to do this, lots of different ways to play around with this. And that's all there is to it. Now, if we get rid of this, and let's say get rid of this, we can create a second person just as easily as we did the first one. So again, we'll call person, and let's call P2, right? And this is going to be a person, and this is going to be Mary. Mary's sex is female, and Mary is, say, 29. We can, at any time we want, call P2 dot, say, show data. Or we could call P2 dot, age, whatever we want. However you want to do this, that's how that works. Come back over here, run this guy again. Actually, let's clear the screen. And now we see Mary is a female. She's 29. Person's name is Mary. They are female and 29 years old. Very cool. Now this, we just printed out P2. We can also print out, P1. P1 still exists, right? So if we do both of these, clear the screen, we get the first one is for P1, which was John. The second one is P2, which is Mary. So this is a massively fast intro to classes with Dart, but you can see very easy to do this. And there's lots of different ways you could set this up. This is just sort of one of the standard ways. You don't even have to create a constructor if you want. You could create another method that sets your data. But, either way, it's pretty much the same thing. So we just do it this way. So not that hard to wrap your brain around. Like I said, classes are a giant topic. You could talk for days and days and days on classes. This is just a very quick intro on how to start to use classes with Dart. And that's all there is to it. In the last video, we created our first class and object, but you'll notice we started by initializing it right away with this constructor. And this is the code from our last video. I'm using the Sublime Text Editor and the Git Bash terminal as always. And as always, you can find a link to the code in the pinned comment section below, as well as a link to the playlist with all the other Dart videos in the series. So check that out if you haven't so far. So very quick recap, we created a person class. That person has a name, sex, and age. And then you can see here's the constructor that kind of creates an object when we first create this thing. If we want to show it, we've got this method that shows it, right? So you see up here, we're creating an object, P1. That's a person object. It's a class, right? And it's John, male, and 44. So we're initializing it right off the bat. We're giving it data right away. That data gets sucked into this constructor, gets assigned into P1, and you're good to go. Well, what happens, let's get rid of this second instance of P2. What happens if we don't want to start out right away initializing this thing? If we don't want to actually give it data right away, we just want to sort of create it and then add the data later on. Perfectly normal. You're going to want to do that all the time. So I'm going to go ahead and save this as c2.dart. It was c.dart before. So let's go ahead and save this, head over to our terminal. I'm in my c.dart stuff directory, and we can run c.dart2.dart, and we get an error, right? It's too few positional arguments. Why? Well, our constructor here is looking for these things, right? And we're not passing these things. So that's kind of a problem. So how can we get around this? Well, very, very easy. We don't have to use a constructor like this. We can just get rid of it. So I'm going to change this from a constructor to a method, right? So let's come down here, and instead of just saying, hey, person, let's instead create a method. So we go void, and let's name this thing. Let's call this add data or something like that, right? The rest of this stays the same. We're going to pass in each of these things, assign them back in like we would before, and we're good to go. Well, now you'll see up here, we create our person object. I'm not going to put any data in here. I'm just going to save it like this. Now, this time if we run it, last time we got an error. This time we don't get an error. We get null, null, and null, which is exactly what you want. We haven't given it anything. We haven't given it any information yet. It's just null. That's perfect. That's fantastic. Now, at any time, we can add whatever data we want to P1. And we could do that in several different ways. We can call this method, right? We could go, let's say, add data. So let's go p1.addData, and then we just pass in whatever we want. So John is a male. John is 44 years old, right? Notice you got to keep these in the same order. So name, sex, and age. Because down here in our method, we're looking for name, sex, and age. And it's going to assign those based on the order you pass them in. All right, so that'll work. Let's go ahead and p1.showData, just like before. Go ahead and save this. Let's come back here and clear this screen, run this guy. You see the first time when we haven't initialized this, haven't added any data, we get null, null, null. The second time after we've added the data, we get John, male, and 44. And it works just fine. And that's all there is to it. Now, that's not the only way you can add data, right? We can comment that out, and we can do it manually. So we can go p1 dot and come down here, and we have name, sex, or age. So let's go name p1.name, and we can set that equal to John, right? So if we save this and run it, we're going to see name is John. The rest of them stay the same. They're still null and null because we haven't added any data for sex or age. We could just as easily come back here and, do the same thing. P1 dot sex equals male. And you'll notice we don't have to do these in order. We could go P1 dot age and just set that equal to 44, right? Down here, it's name, sex, and age. Up here, it's name, age, and sex. It doesn't matter. We're doing them one at a time. It's perfectly fine. So if we go ahead and save this, run it, clear this screen, boom, we get John, male, 44, just as you would expect to see. The person's name is John. They are male and 44 years old. And that's all there is to it. So either way, it really doesn't matter. Do it the way we did it in the last video or do it the way we did it in this video. It just depends on your program flow, what you're trying to accomplish. If you have a system to where you want to create an object, a person, P1, P2, P597, and then later on, as those people come in, you add them individually, you're going to want to do it like we did it in this video. If you know right away all of your data and you just want to map it right up, if you got a database you're sucking data out of and you're just creating objects as they come, do it like we did in the last video. You already know your data, assign them to the class, create an object, and you're good to go. So either way, whatever you're looking for in your program, that's how you do it.
So that's it. You now have a solid fundamental understanding of the Dart programming language. Your next step is to start learning Flutter, which is an amazing framework for building cross-platform GUI apps. I have a Flutter playlist here on my YouTube channel, and I'll link to that in the description below, so be sure and check that out. And also check out my website, Codemy.com, where I have over 50 other courses on web development, database development, GUI app creation using Kinter, KV, and PyQt5, and much more. Be sure to use coupon code YouTube50 to get 50% off memberships on my courses, videos, and books for one-time fee, which is insanely cheap. My name is John Elder from Codemy.com. I hope you enjoyed this course, and I'll see you in the next one.